Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Friends, you did it. You made it through to the number one player in the 50 most relevant. Hello, it's MJ. 50 days in a row you've been putting up with me. I am so sorry for it. But we've been talking through who I think are the most relevant players in SuperCoach, DreamTeam, and AFL Fantasy. We hope over the past couple of months it's been able to help inform, enlighten, and maybe provoke some thoughts and conversations in your fantasy footy teams of SuperCoach, DreamTeam, and AFL Fantasy. Talking about Josh Dunkley, the most relevant player, in my opinion, for the formats in 2023. Joining me throughout this episode, you've heard him plenty during the off-season and will more to come. Kane, hello, mate. How are you? We're talking about your boy.
I'm great, MJ. I'm so good. No one's more relieved than you, though. I know it's a power of work, and I did hear there's actually one more podcast to go, so just hang on for us for one more day. You've been
do that.
Keeping my mornings nice and fantasy full for the better part of 2 months now, so hats off to you. But
thank you.
Yes, this is definitely a player that I know we've chatted a lot about on our Keeper podcast over the years. I know he's come up seemingly every year in one way, shape or form throughout the season. He always gives us joy, and unfortunately he's given us some heartbreak along the way as well. But for mine, I think this is clear. Number one, relevant player heading into 23. There's just so much in his game that excites you. I think there's so much potential that maybe finally be able to be realised with maybe a role that he hasn't had for long stretches. And he's certainly already fired up the Doggies faithful with a few of his comments about this Brisbane midfield. So I can't wait for that game against the Dogs. And I think this is a role, it sounds like it's been, a long time in the making, just whether it was Essendon a few years ago or staying at the Dogs. I think Josh Dunkley at a new club as fantasy coaches, we wanted it. We knew how good the Dogs were, but they were so good in that midfield. And I think now at Brisbane, we could see what a lot of us have been hoping for from Josh Dunkley for the better part of 3 or 4 years finally realised.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Just the 26 years of age does retain the mid-forward eligibility for us, and that is no doubt one of the big important reasons why I've got him at number one. Last year, his top AFL Fantasy and Dream Team score of 139 was against the West Coast Eagles. He seemed to like playing against the West Australian teams. That's also where he had his top SuperCoach score of the season last year. It was a 155. You've got to go back to 2019, though, for some career high scores. In the same game against Kane's Melbourne Football Club, he delivered a 189 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, and he's a part of the 200 club in SuperCoach. That same game, a 202. He's averaged a 108.8 across AFL Fantasy and Dream Team last year. It means in those formats, you're going to be paying up a decent amount of your salary cap, but it's just over 985,000 in Dream Team and just a touch over 960,000 in AFL Fantasy. Also got the average of 108 in SuperCoach, and he's just a couple of grand shy of the 6,000 price point. And our Patreon and Spotify subscribers, Kane, that have been listening to our keeper tier rankings that we did, 8 tiers of players broken down, 50 players. We just like 50 here at the Coaches Panel. That's as high as I can count if I'm being honest with you. But we did this pre-season, off-season conversation around who we thought were the best keeper league prospects. And there was this thing you kept always bringing up and driving home for our supporters that were having access to that, which you can get access to if you become a Spotify subscriber or a Patreon. You can go and get them. But you kept driving point this home. You want these guys that are premiums in their line that have that capacity to get in the mid-20s possession range and then through tackles, marks, and goals, that column to build up to around about 10, if not higher. And if they can consistently do that, then, ladies and gentlemen, you've got yourself a premium you can trust in keepers. But when you think about Dunkley, he is probably the best personification of that, whether it be an uncontested possession, whether it be a contested mark, whether it be a clearance, whether it be a defensive tackle, whether it be space needing to be created offensively or defensively, or going inside forward 50 and being an aggressive and attacking viable option, an avenue to goal. Like, you look at all these categories and columns of how someone can build their fantasy scores across the formats, and it's just big green ticks for Josh Dunkley.
Yeah, it's remarkable, MJ. And I think that's what drew us to him. And I think for the whole fantasy community, we do have to go back to 2019, because that's when we saw this incredible blossoming, really, wasn't it? It took 6 rounds for him to get put back into that midfield as a permanent midfielder. But you look at what he did in that last 16 games, and it was 124 in DT and 128 in SuperCoach. And ever since then, we've said that is the potential. That is number one player in both format potential. Now, clearly we fast forward all the way through 2020, 21 and 22, and there's been some ups and downs. You know, it was only 11 home and away games across 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
Last year he played all 22 and was relatively healthy, but there was some role uncertainty, and that is partially due to that side he plays, and it just has so many really top end midfielders. Yeah. And they're all so brilliant in other ways. That's the other thing, is it does become matchup dependent. You know, you've got the fast hands of Lever and that tenacity. We know Bont's just brilliant at anything he does. And then McRae's got that great mix of extraction, but also precise by foot. And then you throw in the development of a Bailey Smith. It got really hard for Josh Dunkley to hold down, you know, a heavy CBA role, which I think to our eyes is where he's best suited. But you got to fit into a team. It's a team game. And those centre bounce numbers never really got to the heights of 70+%, which is where a lot of these top end mids live, don't they? They live in that high range. They're in and around the ball constantly. And the reason they're not is they're probably having a spell on the pine or a very quick spell in the forward line. But Dunkley, we haven't seen that. And despite not seeing it, we've still had stretches, most notably since that 2019 season was that 2021 season. And it was 6 games of 116 in DT and 129 in SuperCoach before that shoulder injury. You know, saw him miss all the way up to round 18. And since then, he was really eased back into the team.
Anyone that comes
we couldn't
back
really
from
read
such
that
a
data.
long time. No,
we had to throw it out. And I think coaches did that last year, didn't they, MJ? They jumped on, they were rewarded, they got a 108 guy. He just was consistent. And now we're presented with this opportunity, new club, a club that was crying out for a big body mid that absorbs a lot of that CBA time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's got us all excited. And you throw in the forward status you mentioned, you're looking at a guy that not only could be top of that line, but with the potential to be the top player in the comp with that forward status.
Yeah.
It gets awfully tricky to not have him.
We'll talk about the possible thought process behind why you might go against him. But let's look at this 2022 season. It consisted of 18 tons in Dream Team and Fantasy. Remember, this is just as Kane alluded to. Some centre bounce volatility. There were games across your season last year where he's attending as low as 28% centre bounces. And yet he's still giving us 18 tons in Dream Team and Fantasy last year. He converted 6 of those into scores over 120, and there's some big ones in there. There's multiple high 130s across these formats, meaning he is someone you can put the captaincy markers on. Just 2 under 80. He ranked 6th for total points across the entirety of the format last year in Dream Team and Fantasy, and 8th by averages overall. That 108 average in Dream Team was basically the same of a 108 in SuperCoach. 15 tons, 7 of them converted into 120 plus scores. And again, he's got 120s, 130s, 140s, and mid 150s. So again, captaincy, vice captaincy considerations through there. 4 games scoring under 80, so a bit more volatility in terms of his scoring range, and yet still a top 15 guy for total points, and his average is top 23. You alluded to a couple of seasons there, Kane, that 2021 year where he was that mid 110s of Dream Team and Fantasy and high 120s in SuperCoach, and then back in 2022 that's in there too. Some might go, Okay, boys, you're picking and choosing your statistical argument. Okay, fine. Let's just look at the first 7 games of last year. So we're not picking and choosing. We're just picking 7 games. A SuperCoach average of 118 and a lower score of 97 and a higher score of 142. That's just the first 7 games. The first 7 games of last year in Dream Team and Fantasy, an average of 121.7, a lower score of 105, a ceiling of 138. That's multiple years over multiple seasons, over multiple roles. Dunkley has shown us this. Even when he's not getting over 50% CBAs, which last year was career highs in terms of the data being tracked that we know of, he's still popping the highest average of all our forwards for us. He's now walking into a side that needs him in the midfield. And that's one of the reasons he's left. Make no mistake about it. He tried to move to Essendon a few years ago. Port Adelaide showed some interest in him in the offseason, and so did many other teams. But he picked Brisbane, yes, for finals aspirations and to add to another premiership medal, even though he's already got one. But it was, I want to go to a midfield and I want to go to a team where I can be a regular staple of the midfield. And when I think of Brisbane, I think of the ball winning of Neil in and outside. I think of the class of McCluggage. I think of the dynamic X factor of Bailey, Rayner through the midfield. Even Azorko has moments of burst. But there's one big skill set that I don't think of about Brisbane, and I feel like Dunkley, along with the ball winning, the contested ball, the aerial marking, he's about to be a permanent solution to that big raging gap in that midfield for them.
Well, it's just a massive point of difference, MJ, when you look at those midfielders you mentioned. You know, Zorko is 175 centimetres, Neil 178 centimetres, Bailey listed at 182, Ashcroft, who comes in, is 182, you know, Lyons 184, McCluggage 185, and then you got Dunkley at 191.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a point of difference midfielder. He's super physical,
let alone ability.
He's super clean. And when you think about the Gabba too, with that shorter ground, if you can get any sort of kick out of the midfield, even if it's rushed and hacked forward, it's going right deep to the mouth of goal. And when you've got a forward line that's as potent as theirs, a bit of chaos is fine. So I think not only does he suit a need, but he suits the way they want to play. They just need to keep supplying that forward line. If you give them enough inside 50s and enough looks, obviously cleaner the better, but they just put scoreboard pressure on. They've added Gunston as well, and that's really how they defend. They defend through scoring. That's been their game. Now, could they change that?
Sure.
Yes. But also those Brisbane conditions, dewy, slippery, it does favour contested footy. It's what makes Neil just stand out so brilliantly. He's so clean, he's so precise. And to have someone like Dunkley, that if you look through his career, he's reeled off multiple 10 plus tackle games. And there's 15s in there, there's 14s, there's 13s. Like, he's more than capable. You look at his last game for the Dogs in that final against Fremantle. 23 touches, 2 marks and a goal. But there's 14 tackles that turn it into 133 in DT. Like, that's what is so impressive about him, is Amazing. That he'll do that and he can do it. And I would think with this new opportunity, not that these players need to be any more motivated, but I think you always are at a new club because you just have to prove it. You really do have to prove it. And I think, again, we're not asking for even a massive increase. Even if we're just talking about 60% CBAs, like, he has shown that he's a 115 guy. And I think that's why it's such an obvious pick, MJ, isn't it? That while you are paying up,
yes,
there's some inbuilt value there. Now, we've obviously flagged what we think the ceiling is, which is right up there with some of the best fantasy, best in the comp. And he's proven that over numerous seasons. But even if it's just what you pay for, you're looking at a top 3 forward at the very, very worst, it feels like, barring injury.
Yeah. The worst case scenario in terms of physically staying on the park is in my eyes, the safest number 1 premium forward that is currently known to us without the variance of DPP. At worst, He holds his centre bounces that he's at right now. Some go, oh, he has to get these big 65, 70 plus CBAs to give us monster scores. No, he doesn't. Last year against Essendon, round 7, scores 130 across the formats. It's off 23% CBAs. A month later against the Eagles, 32% CBAs, goes 139 in fantasy, 143 in SuperCoach. A couple of weeks later against GWS, 46% CBAs, goes 107 in DreamTeam and fantasy, 114 in... So the narrative that he must have the CBA is false. He doesn't have to. But if he does get it, which I believe is the primary motivator for movement, now he's around the ball more, which isn't just great for clearances, contested possessions, effective disposals, score involvements, stoppage clearances, all these elements, but tackles. And you combine him with these elements along with his marks and then the ability to be a damaging forward option for them in what is, like you said, already stacked midfield, is just mouthwatering for me. But Kane, I've got two thoughts I would like to throw out to you, because we don't, even though we have both and long-time Coaches Panel fans know, we have been on the Dunkley train, sometimes the only two people on it, but we have been on the Dunkley train in first class for a very long time and are happy to welcome everyone aboard with no bias or judgment. But the two questions I want to ask is this. New team, new system, how important is that to you? And does that need to play any form of factor in the variables we consider before we do lock him away in round 1?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about the new team, MJ, and I always like to start, let's just get some simple numbers. So I had a look, what do the Bulldogs do? What do the Lions do in sort of total fantasy points? And there's really not much difference in the total fantasy points. You know, last year Brisbane was 15-24 in AF, DT scoring. Bulldogs were 40 points more. So we're talking about 2 points extra a Bulldog than a Lion. SuperCoach, well, Lions actually had more points than the Bulldogs, funnily enough, namely due to how many points they scored, but they 1677 to 1674. So from a SuperCoach perspective, it's actually better to be a Lion on average than a Bulldog, despite those extra DT points. You look at the nature of the game. Okay, Bulldogs averaging a bit more of a ball, 31 more disposals a game. But then again, you look at goals, 14-12 in the Lions' favour. So I think all those things, they cancel out for mine. I think, as you mentioned earlier, MJ, it is around the role that's super exciting for Dunkley. I guess the point, though, MJ, that I think, how could someone come to a point of not starting Dunkley? I've been racking my brain. What would I need to not pick this guy to start the season? Because I think even if you did that, he'd still clearly be in your upgrade plans. And all that I can really come up with is you're taking him on with a midfielder, because at this price point of 108, if there's a midfielder that you love at comparable price and you think they're going to be right up there. Now, obviously, my counterpoint would be, can you not fit them in and Josh Dunkley? Do you really love that many midfielders? But let's just say you've come down to this final decision. You've got enough money for Dunkley, but you think, you know what? There's 100 averaging midfielder here that I reckon can go 115. And that's about where I've got Josh Dunkley. So I'm going to pick that player instead of Dunkley, use the cash elsewhere. Maybe it's to get a basement rookie to a rookie you prefer.
Sure.
That's about the best I can think of, is that you just love another mid, and maybe we get enough forward rookies. Maybe you like enough forward mid prices, or maybe you're just comfortable with the upside of a Rosie, a Cogs, a Taranto, whoever else you may like, that you say, you know what? I was already going to play Dunkley in my midfield because I just wanted to manage these other mid-price guys in the forward line that I'm juggling, all those type of things.
Sure. And
you go, you know what? If I'm talking about Dunkley versus a mid, maybe there is a cheaper mid, and maybe it's a Jack McRae, MJ, who you spoke about yesterday. Maybe that's a guy that you go, do I want McRae or do I want Dunkley? I'll get to Dunkley eventually, but I just think McRae could return to his 115. Or is it a Josh Kelly? Is it a Petrarca or a Bont? Is there someone that you think at a cheaper price is going to make that jump and be in the top few of their line, I would say it's awfully risky. Now, if you've got the crystal ball out and you pick the Jack Steele, the Tuke Miller of 2021, or you pick the Andy Brayshaw, maybe I could see your point. I guess where I've got Josh Dunkley projected is he's making a jump as well.
Yeah,
and his worst case is still a player I want for the season. That's always the risk with those guys in the mids. You go that mid, they don't make it.
Yeah,
they can be a long way off. Whereas I just don't think, even if Josh Dunkley regressed to a flat 100, you're still happy with him. Now, it's disappointing at the price. But I think that would have to be your frame of mind is I can get something cheaper and equal or better. And then I can obviously take that cash and get even more points elsewhere. Hope Josh Dunkley comes out, solid. And then I'm looking to upgrade.
Yeah, he goes a 90. Yeah, you're looking at the early fixture and you're going, okay, they've got Port Adelaide round 1. Historically, Port were one of the more restrictive teams to score against. Round 2, Melbourne, okay, he should be good there. Round 3, though, it's the Bulldogs. They're going to gun.
There's going to be some spite in And MJ, maybe that's your game theory approach. And maybe that's just, there is so many people on this guy. I understand there's risk, but like we spoke about with the Jack Steele episode, if you're gunning for the win, if you're gunning for top 10, top 100, you're going to have to zig when everyone else zags eventually. Totally. Now, some people are hesitant to do that at the start, and I understand that. But I also understand that there's some people who go, yeah, but that's the greatest time to make a jump on the comp. Yes, of course, my season could be in trouble, but also, what if it comes off? What if Josh Dunkley does struggle in the first
go
month
90 out of the gate kind of thing?
That's probably where my head would be at, is that you're trying to be a contrarian, you're trying to use the ownership against everyone else, and you love someone else that you really think, I can't fit this guy in unless it's at Josh Dunkley's expense. And I think there's going to be upside. Or, again, as I said, you want to use that cash and make a wider improvement to your team. But I think you're really, again, I get the risk. I get what happens if it comes off and you make a jump on the competition. Personally, wouldn't be the player in my 30 that I want to take on, because that's the risk reward.
Yeah, I look at it as, okay, say, let's use Josh Kelly, because I haven't got him in the 50 most relevant. So I've got to find a way to sneak him in. So I'll use him as a contrasting player. I'm bullish on Josh Kelly. I think he's going to go 120 over the first 6 weeks. And I have Dunkley going 100 over the first 6 weeks. Oh, okay, sure. Okay, I'll bite at that. No problem at all. So you're 120 points ahead. Okay. And you're still going to go and get the guy that you think is one of the best forwards. Okay. So you're 120 points ahead. I can make that up with one captaincy or vice captaincy consideration in one round. I get one rookie roulette right. Remember, people that had Nick Martin on field as opposed to Caden Baldwin last year. If you had Josh Rochelle on field as opposed to Tristan Cherry on field in round 1. There's like 200 points right there, just in 2 positional players. So I look at it as, yes, could it go your way? Absolutely, it's in the world of probabilities. But you're running against a very tight and dangerous ship.
And that's the thing, MJ, with that just hypothetical point that we went through, is you would need to have 30 players to be exceeding the value of
You've
what
got to
you're
nail
thinking.
everything.
You're taking out probably 15 players just because they're rookies. Yep, that's cool. You're probably really honing in on 15 players across all lines where you're like, this guy's role is to, be in the team for the whole season. He's got a bit of meat on the bone, or he's probably at max price, but he's a captain option every week. So this is my point. If you love a player, and we use Josh Kelly as that example, that you're taking him on, that's only one of your 15 players you're really picking from. Have you got 15 guys across all lines that you say are better value, are more likely to be top of their line, are a captaincy option? And that's where, for me, you're not just picking Kelly v Dunkley. You're also saying that Dunkley isn't as good as maybe Cobbs or Rosie or Taranto or Dom Sheed. You're having to make all of those picks.
It's the combinations of it. Yeah.
And that's where I think I personally can't make that call. I think what Dunkley's price is at, what I have is expectation to score, the role he'll play, not only being a top forward, a guy I keep for the whole season, but a genuine captaincy option for me. Brisbane plays so many early games in the round. He's a perfect vice captain guy. But if that's where your head's at, and you've gone through and you've got, Gus Brayshaw making a jump, and you've got Doherty making a jump, and you go, well, Dunkley's not going to make the same jump as someone I've got, like that. That's the only thing I can come up with, how someone who's, putting effort into their team, I'll say, not just doing a random team, would go, this is my logic for no Dunkley because I'm doing this. And if that's your decision, fantastic. But
that's
where I sit now, I couldn't make that call because I can't have, taking out those rookies, 15 players that I would rather have across all lines than Dunkley. I just can't. I just 100%. Can't see it at the moment.
Yeah, I'm with you. You look at his ownership percentage, 53% in AFL Fantasy, 65% in Dream Team, and 63% in SuperCoach. And they are mostly, at this time of the preseason, the more fanatical and serious percentages rather than the broader.
And MJ, what would that be after 3 rounds? That's what I'd be curious, because I think that would be almost 90, 95%.
And after
3 rounds, the top 10,000. Take a poll on what that is. And I think that's where ownership's obviously a good guide, because we've got that, but we don't know what's serious. Are you just playing with it for the day? Like, that's what's always fascinating with ownership, isn't it? And I think that's what gets tricky with these teams. I think you obviously want to start locking pieces in, because the good thing about locking pieces in a way is now that pool of 15 players that you're really weighing up, we know we're all going to have the same cows because they just pick themselves. But that probably 15 people you're toing and froing on every day, I think Dunkley's that piece that now that lists at 14. And there's someone else you love to get. And all of a sudden, hopefully by the time you've seen some of these practice games, all rookies considered, it's probably only 2 or 3 people you're really wanting to be weighing up, isn't it, MJ? You've got your scenario of, hey, if this rookie who I've got as a cheap price doesn't play, I'm dropping this primo to this person and I'm getting the rookie that I can afford. Like, we know that that's how a preseason builds go.
Yeah.
We're in mid-Feb.
We're in mid-Feb. I get why people would, it's to do something different. That's the motivator. And that's okay. What happens though when he goes 120 in the first 2 weeks? And your guy that's going well is also going well. That's like, then you can't get into him. That becomes the hard
Let's be honest, MJ, you're cheering for an injury, aren't you? That's really what that
which is never the way you want to play the game.
Logic to it. No. Again, unless you truly believe there's a fixture, you've seen something, and there's someone that comes out of the gates.
And back your gut if
they're
that's
that
the
130
case,
guy. But my point would be, if you believe that, by all means, grab that
player. It should
player.
outdo something else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You grab that player, but also grab Dunkley. Make a sacrifice elsewhere. That's where I'd be pushing.
Yeah, I think
if you've got that belief, that's what I keep saying. If you believe 15 players are better than this guy in terms of what they bring to your team, now we know not everyone can bring top 6, top 8 of their line, because that's not how the game works. You have to have players that increase in value. But gee whiz, if you're at the 10 to 12 premium range, which is where it seems like most teams have, that's how you're going to have, how many premiums you're going to take into the year. I am just so hard pressed to find a group of 10 or 12 players that are premiums.
That you like more than Dunkley.
That I like more than Dunkley. Now, someone else might be different, but I think this is why the ownership's where it is. I think this is why it's number 1.
Yep.
I think everyone knows that the upside is enormous.
The downside
isn't much.
No.
And I think that's why we are where we are late.
It's where he is.
If something changes and a comment's made, we'll adjust. But I don't know how at this point reasonably you can say that. If you do, maybe we set up a bet, MJ, and we make just a bit of a line on what we think Josh Dunkley is going to go throughout the season. And again, the whole game is prediction. You're making a prediction on everyone, because by picking one person, you invariably aren't picking someone else. So that's why it's so fascinating, because it's never just 1v1. It's 2v2
all
off
the
the back
other
of that and all the machinations. But I just think personally, and it's a personal list that you've worked on and everyone else has given their thoughts to you, and we've just put in a pot and we've stirred it all around. I don't know how this guy isn't in your starting team.
And that's why he's at number one. If I was trying to find what is the most bulletproof, bankable guy that might not be the number one scorer overall, he might not even be the number one forward overall, but the most reliable option, the most variables I can poke holes, eliminate, look, and forecast for. Everything that I use to track fantasy football tells me Josh Dunkley is someone that you build around. And if you want to go the other way, that's totally okay. God bless you. I wish you well, and I genuinely do. But I don't see a world how you feel comfortable entering into round one with Josh Dunkley outside of your team. You're a very, very nervous coach with every Lions game. And that's not how I like to play my fantasy footy. Where he goes on draft day, though, Kane, is interesting. We've talked about him a lot and the forwards. Let's split them up. Fantasy and SuperCoach. It probably changes a little bit. Where are you taking him on draft day across those two formats, mate?
Well, MJ, for my projection, I don't know if it does. I've got him at number one across
every
both
format.
formats. I just personally do. I think AF, it's even easier.
There's no conversation to me. Yeah.
I just think what you can do, locking away that position, it's such a tough position at the top. It's always a position you feel like you can have fun on the waivers and flesh out your bottom 2 to 3 forwards. But I just think at the top end, this is a guy that if he didn't have forward status, he'd be in the conversation for a top 8 mid. Like that's just his game. So I'm getting him as a forward. Now, SuperCoach, we've mentioned it. There's multiple seasons where this guy's 120 plus, and sometimes even as high as 130 plus for large stretches. And 10 points is usually my rough rule. It depends how you rank the forwards, if that number goes up or down slightly, but it's usually at the very worst, it's an 8-point bump. So if I'm comparing, a 110 forward to a 120 mid, they're more or less comparable. So for me, I've got him 115 plus in that format. So chucking the 10 points on that, he's right up there with the Olivers and the Lairds. I think there's capacity for them to maybe drop down a touch and Dunk there to go up a touch. And the blanket in that midfield, I just think I'm taking this guy, I'm locking away that piece.
It's the positional separation at the forward line too,
Yeah, I just think this is a guy that's he's that guy. I'm comfortable giving him a captaincy in a draft where, your pool might be limited to some of the salary cap formats where you can have multiple of these first round or second round caliber players.
That's true.
That's just where I sit with him, MJ. And again, at the end of the day, you have to make a call. The number one pick can be really tough. Could he slide through? But if you're at number one, he's not coming through to you at 20.
No, absolutely.
So eventually you're going to have to make the call. What player do you want? And that's where I've got him. So anytime after that, I'm through the moon.
You're through the roof if you're not pick one and he's there.
Through the moon, I'm through the roof. I'm all over the shop. I'd be so happy. I would not be able to talk like I couldn't talk 10 seconds ago.
The best thing to do would be, use our mates, the Draft Doctors mock simulator, and see what your side look and feels like.
And maybe, MJ, that's something where if you get the choice of what pick you want, because if I've got pick one, there's no shenanigans there. I'm picking Dunkley, I move on. But if someone says, hey, I've got pick 4, would love pick 1, and you're pretty confident that maybe he gets to you, or you've got them so close. Yeah, I think that's where those simulators are great, because we know that once the draft starts, it's a new beast. It's anything could happen.
The variables of humanity kick in.
Yeah, what happened in the news that day? Something's come up on a draft night. We know how many times a player has a niggle at training the night of a draft and they just slide just because of that reaction. Rory Laird was that guy last year, MJ, that in that draft season. Right. So for me, if I'm making that call, it's Dunkley. Anytime after that, I'm thrilled.
Yep.
And again, that's purely because I think he's a clear away forward with the upside to be the best player in the comp. If he's the best player in the comp as a forward, you are so far and away.
You're ahead of the pack. Well, it's because
it's
you're
just-
F6 and you're M7, or like that gap of the last forward and last mid becomes so far accentuated.
Well,
I'm
especially
with you,
MJ.
man.
The reason I say this as well is because in draft, it is about winning. It's all
Yes.
that's all it is. Because in salary cap, we know that you go, oh, I'm going for rank. I'm going to go for the top 1,000, and you might pull back a little bit. You might push on, but in draft, there's only one winner in that league. So I always favour the upside, and there is no player in the game this year for me personally that possesses more upside if everything breaks right than Josh Dunkley. If I get him going 120, 125 across the formats with a forward status, there is no better player in the game. There's just not. So that's where I sit. Where do you have him?
I'm very, very similar. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, it's not even a consideration. It's a lock. In SuperCoach, it's at least a conversation with the 120 mids for me. It all depends on.
And to be fair to those mids, I'm probably not gutted if I'm at 3 and Dunkley's gone and I get an Oliver or a Laird or someone else.
It all becomes like every variable, but certainly in SuperCoach, how many league members have you got? What's the on-field rules? That's always there, but he's absolutely in the mix along with the 120 guys in SuperCoach as well for me. Hey, buddy, you've been a superstar, not just on this episode, but right throughout the 50 most relevant this preseason. Congratulations, mate, and thank you once again.
Oh, pleasure, MJ. It's always fun. It always goes quick. Probably not for you because you do them every day, but me listening, I'm always like, can maybe MJ get it to 60 or 70 next year? Maybe just go all the way from, Jan 1 to the start of round 1. But I know it is a lot on your plate. So from everyone, thank you. You've kept us entertained.
Happy to help.
Given me a lot to think about. That's always the other thing. Sometimes I feel really good in my team, and then I put a podcast in and I go, what did I just do for the last 24 hours? Because now MJ's got me rethinking everything. So thank you to you. Thank you to everyone else that jumped on.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
As you said, you could do them solo, let's be honest, but it is nice to have everyone jumping in, contributing, throwing different ideas around. That's what this time of the year is about. Let's get all this.
Really
let's start thinking. Let's start expanding that thought. So we're nearly at crunch time. We're starting to see actual games, not between teams playing themselves.
About a week away from some of
those
those practice games, which should be good. You're right. Look, a massive thank you to, the guys, the coaches panel that do a power of work behind the scenes. Some of them, some of them you don't. Some of them jump on the podcast. Some of them write articles. But from me, a massive thank you to every single one of the guys that are a part of the coaches panel. So Jordox, Fox, John, Fish, Mini Monk, Louis, Jimmy, the great man Kane himself, Rids and Tim. These guys do an absolute incredible power of work. Like I said, some some you don't, but they are equally important parts of the 50 most relevant. To our guests throughout the preseason, the Phantom, we've got Selby of Moreira's Magic, Bales of AFL Fantasy Fanatics has jumped on as well, Holmesy of the Pod, Stevie Fizz of the Draft Doctors, and I hope I haven't forgotten any of our other guests that we might have had. But thank you from me to them, and ultimately, thank you to you for listening to these episodes over the past 50 days. If you've loved them, go back and listen to them again. We think they're recorded in such a way that even through the preseason, as it continues over these final few weeks, there's still some nuggets of gold. You can go back and listen to them. If you haven't left a 5-star rating and review on these podcasts, we'd love it if you could do it. It's one of the ways it helps others discover the coaches panel as they're looking for fantasy footy content. If you haven't read the articles either for Josh Dunkley or any of the other 50, they're online at coachespanel.tv. And the links for our Patreon supporter group, where they have been getting these podcasts earlier than you. They've also been getting a bunch of additional content, podcasts and articles and hidden group access. You can still join those at coachespanel.tv. So what's next for the coaches panel, you might be asking? Well, I'm not quite done with the 50 most relevant, because there's a few players who are pretty unlucky to miss it. So I've got another article and a podcast coming with 10 players that, for me, they didn't quite make the 50. I want to talk you through who they are and why they just missed out the 50. And then we'll start talking cash cows, structures, strategies, trading insights and advice, getting through some team reveals, bringing some full panel podcasts together where you get to hear multiple of the guys all in one episode. We cannot wait for that for you. Thank you again for listening. We so greatly appreciate you for taking the time out of your day to listen. And until I chat to you again very, very soon, Farewell from all of us here at the Coaches Panel.